to describe the place she was in was immaterial. Dark clouds connected with thin strands of gaseous material were Tabitha's navigation points through the memories behind the veil. Though time meant nothing here, she sensed she had been amongst her memories, her children, for a reasonable time in this time-space dimension store of memories, some given willingly, some accidental, some belonging to people unfortunate enough to have fallen through the mysterious archway. All memories of people dead lingered here, blended together, dispersed, moved spontaneously in their exosphere, jostled for room, connected. Who could be the one to understand what happened here? How could it be anyone but her? The memories could be easily accessed by diving through their dense, cloud-like exteriors, by putting your head, arms or legs through the opaque material until you became part of the memory, as an observer, watching the events unfold. You could interact with objects that were inanimate and you could change the memory in doing so. Tabitha knew that Cecilia had done just this, and she had, by all accounts, changed her version of reality. To Tabitha, of course, reality had always been what Cecilia called the new place. Such was the mystery of the veil. Another mystery, some way explained to a point by Severus, was that Tabitha's ability, and Cecilia's too, of being able to survive with the memories and reappear, not dying as a wizard would, and thereby donating their memories to the ever-growing repository. But it was not to understand the mysteries that she was behind the veil this time. While her hypothesis about how, back here, the memories worked interested her, it was not her prime focus for being here, not now. Her task was simple, as far as navigating her way around clouds which moved and shifted at will as she searched for those in particular whose features would, in the near future, make a big difference. To probably any other person the place would be entirely outlandish and bizarre, ludicrous and nonsensical. But to Tabitha Benwright it made perfect sense. But executing her endeavor was turning out to be more and more difficult. On a regular basis ever-increasing memories arrived, making the search more complicated. It had taken her, well, weeks so far, Tabitha estimated, rest and food taken when she needed by entering memories and taking what she needed, tactfully and carefully, so the chronology of the memory was preserved. Not that she needed food and rest here, time was at a standstill and, in turn, so was hunger and rest. It just went to show how, despite the lack of physiological need, these fundamental human needs demanded to be satisfied. What could be causing the increase? It was a question that occupied Tabitha's mind at present as she carefully traversed the memories. Carefully because, one slip would have her down, relatively speaking, past the memories and into, well, if not oblivion, a place where she could not get hold of the rope that tied her to the shelving in the department office. Had there been a sudden increase in deaths or prisoners? That would account for increase. Or some other means of accessing memories? Tabitha hoped that it would soon cease, for she knew that every memory, identical in outer character to one another, would have to be examined for as soon as they appeared, so changeable that they were and difficult to distinguish between. If she did not, she may never find the one she was looking for. Resting on a particularly thick cloud, she looked down through the translucent material. As she sank through, Tabitha was relieved that the memory was empty, for now. It was the scene of a living room, with an tapestry, wing-back chair right next to an empty hearth on floorboards. She leaned back. It reminded her of Severus's home, 42, Spinner's End, decorated around the time of Victoria's accession to the throne and little changed. Tabitha closed her eyes momentarily, picturing his face in her mind. They had drifted away, but that was inevitable, given her task. He understood her. And for this reason it was likely, she concluded, that he had never pressed her for a conventional relationship. He was a good man, a great man, considering his input recently. Had she been able to live for 1,000 years, she could not begin to think like Severus Snape. She opened her eyes again. Her strategy was not exactly what Cleus Lupin wanted, of course. Nothing anyone did was exactly what Cleus wanted. That was why, Severus always said that the wizard refused to delegate. Perhaps it was in his nature that he needed to be in control. Callias wanted it destroyed? Tabitha let out a sigh, her stomach working on her mind to get a word in about her increasing hunger, and she glanced in the direction of the house's kitchen. It had to be destroyed, of course. She got to her feet, the floorboards squeaking beneath her, and began to walk lightly towards the kitchen door. But it was so beautiful, they all were. How could something so beautiful have to be destroyed? Once she had found it, once she had held it in her hands, she knew she would always remember it. It would be a part of Tabitha Penright, and its mortality weighted heavily in her mind. Once it had gone, it would never exist again, extinct. Nothing anyone could do could ever revive it. And she was the assassin. Little was available in the kitchen, and Tabitha's eye was drawn towards the pantry. This memory must be quite an old one. In the cold store there was some cheese and ham, and the bread, a sort of off-white color, had a knife next to it, inviting her to cut a slice. Could she do it? He'd asked her that, he who thought he was in control of what she would be doing. What she would be doing, what she was doing, was a natural thing, inevitable, something that would have to be done. It was like asking Isambard Brunel to design and build a bridge. Absurdly simple. But he felt he needed to feel he was in charge, then she would not be the one to shatter the illusion. Tabitha bit into her sandwich, the saltiness of the ham tingling on her tongue. Sometimes the world, where other people lived, was so complicated. Mysteries, on the other hand, they were the simple things, things which could be easily understood. A few more bites later and Tabitha had sated her appetite. And just in time too. The rickety front gate standing at the bottom of the garden path swung open, and 3 children, laughing and chatting, bustled through it. Tabitha looked up, at her umbilical cord of a rope. While the people in these memories could not see or interact with her, Tabitha felt more than a little awkward as an observer in the memory, and chose to let it get on with itself. She shinned up, looking down as the children bowled through the wooden plank door, chatting loudly, before calling out for Gran. Perhaps a thicker memory, an older one, would be a better resting place. Older ones had denser clouds, and they were quite comfortable to sleep on. Tabitha looked around on the horizon, hoping that the memory she sought was not so thick that it was impenetrable. Getting comfortable, her rucksack doubling as a pillow, Tabitha reached subconsciously for her throat, her mind reviewing, for want of a better word, the day's work. Then she sat back up suddenly. Her necklace, her locket on the chain. A family hand-me-down. It was gone. 88,888,888. As the sun, shrouded in morning mist, filtered through the thin nylon curtains, Cecilia realized that she had woken up in the cottage's living room. She stared at the green and brown striped pattern as she tried to work out why it was she was here and not upstairs in bed. She stared at the horizontal lines as the dust in the air sparkled in the sunlight. It took Cecilia a few minutes to register that she had a feeling in her stomach, as if she had got to the highest point of an Alton Towers roller coaster and was about to plummet over the imagined abyss. What was this feeling? And then, a few minutes later, the evening before dawned on her, slowly and creeping, as if losing the duvet cover in the night, with the realization that you are entirely exposed to the elements as real as the emptiness and despair that was writhing inside. Cecilia folded her arms round herself and pictured her son, little Septimus, bounding down the stairs at any moment, full of excitement and trepidation at his impending journey, and she forced the feeling of hatred that she felt for her brother-in-law and that to be enforced separation imposed on them that hung about her like an odor into a corner of her mind, screwing up her eyes and fists in the effort. Cecilia opened her eyes as the rage passed, the emotion turning to sadness. Unbidden teardrops filled her eyes, and they dropped onto the settee where she still lay, horizontal, darkening the fabric where they fell. She was still trapped by wizards. No matter what she did, there was always going to be wizards, pulling the strings. And she just agreed. blithely and happily, to allow her son to go to their wretched school. If she had had any sense at all, she would have taken Septimus that night and ran, risking imprisonment, yes. But her conscience would be clear. Cecilia had been amazed that she was still at the cottage herself that morning. But of course, she couldn't put him through that. Cecilia thought of the day she had had with Septimus, in Diagonally, the wonder of his wand choosing him, buying the things he would need for the school he wanted. Yes, wanted to attend. Yes, she had bought him an expensive broom, which he loved, but it was the strength of his mother he needed, which he deserved. The broom wouldn't buy the love he'd missed in the last 2 years, and in the months to come, if she were to be interned again at the Durmstrang Institute. Cecilia sat up, bending forward so far that her forehead almost touched her knees. She also knew that she had been focusing on their visit to Diagonally to avoid thinking about Remus, her beloved husband, whom she could not help but again fall to the mercy of wizards and their will to help. None of that mattered now. Septimus would be gone so very soon, and she knew she would have to face whether British or an island off Norway, it would make little odds. Her destination was a rock in the middle of the North Sea. The only difference was that Dementors did not guard Durmstrang. As he descended the stairs, Cleus thought it best to say nothing to Cecilia, her head bent in supplication. He trod lightly and turned right, heading into the kitchen. Whether she had registered his presence Cleus did not know, but she did not look up. It made perfect sense, of course. It fitted Cleus's behavior. It was predictable, given the antecedents. Cecilia looked at the brown swirls on the green background of the carpet, a part of her mind stilling her emotions by comparing the sweeps of the curls, like chocolate sauce in custard. She had challenged his authority, yes. But it did not make it any easier to take, to be punished like that. And Cleus had made it clear to her that she would be the one who would tell Septimus this time. But she knew that she would not, could not, show this to Septimus. She would keep it in. All would be normal for her son as he got ready for his first journey on the Hedgewards Express and his first day at secondary school. It was now up to her to give the performance of a lifetime, practiced to a T, giving bad news to her son but making it seem unimportant. Cecilia raised her head and looked around her. The cottage's living room, so welcoming yesterday, now felt cold and distant. But she knew she was thinking rationally now. If she was planning, she was even thinking rationally now, pushing her emotion far down into her. Like a volcano it would, in time, erupt violently, but now all Cecilia could think about were their immediate plans. Had Septimus got everything he needed? Had they enough food so he could at least take some sandwiches? She didn't want him to go hungry. Had she put aside enough money? Had Septimus all he needed for school? It wouldn't be long until his broom and Mervyn would be sent on, destined for the Hedgewards Express's luggage compartments. An expert in magical creatures travelled with the animals that were too unwieldy to travel with the students, mostly owls, but also snakes and cats, and the brooms had their own section lest they got damaged. The call would come between 9 and 10 that morning. Septimus would have to hurry if he was to make his owl's cage respectable for the long journey north. The cuckoo clock struck 6, which drew Cecilia's attention to the time. 3 hours. Septimus would not be up yet and she wouldn't wake him just yet. The last time in his own bed, well, his bed. His own bed was back in Dalton Drive, in Edgeford, at hers and Remus's house. The point was the point. He needed his sleep. Cecilia shook her head and made her way over to the fireplace. The fire crackled green as she tossed a small sprinkle of her special flu powder into the hearth. It was inevitable, so early in the morning, that no one would be around at that time in the morning, but she left a message for Freya in any case. It was short, but spoke briefly of the past being just so. A second message more cryptic, but with enough words to allow it to be understood whilst, at the same time, not understood when, and it had to be when, Cleus checked the flu network. A creak to her left prompted Cecilia to look in the direction of the kitchen, and she saw Callias push the door open carrying 2 steaming mugs. Hastily Cecilia folded up the paper in which the powder was contained and held it in her hand before turning to Cleus Lupin and getting to her feet. Neither said a word as he handed Cecilia a mug of black tea, but found the civility to be able to nod in acknowledgement. He said nothing, pausing as he handed it to her before making his way upstairs. Halfway up he stopped, looking down. "I'll be accompanying you both to platform 87/8THS. He smiled a little. "I wouldn't miss Septimus's first day for the world." When Septimus got up, an hour and a half later, it was with the spirit of a newborn spring lamb. He'd washed and dressed without being prompted. Yes, miracles did happen, apparently, and bounded downstairs, full of life. Cecilia's brooding was instantly shelved, and she felt the automation of the mother she needed to be click into place. He was thrilled when his broom, which he carefully brought down from his room as if it were the crown jewels, and Mervyn too, treated with equal care, were collected by a Hedgewood's express guard, the knock causing the little owl to shriek in alarm as he arrived at the back door. Septimus, with due ceremony, presented both to the little stout man, who saluted him, as Cecilia hung back in the kitchen, and congratulated him on his place at the school. The second miracle was that Septimus had already packed everything he was taking into a bug trunk that had belonged to his father. It still had evidence of graffiti, knocks and scrapes. It had been used as a sledge on more than one occasion by Remus, Sirius and James down the stairs at Hedgewood's, according to Lily, and he had put everything he needed into it. Cecilia had insisted on checking and had been quietly impressed by her son's meticulousness. He'd included everything necessary, though perhaps a few too many copies of Quidditch Quarterly. After his breakfast, during which she had absent-mindedly set fire to the kitchen blinds by letting the toast burn, Septimus asked her about what Durmstrang was like. Was it like Hedgewood's? What were the professors like? It had caught her off guard when he'd asked, and Cecilia had wondered aloud that she was sure she had already spoken to him about it. Her son insisted that she had not, and it had taken all her strength to enter a discourse, as if he were a student and Cecilia was dealing in cold, hard facts. She told him it was high up in the mountains, it was cold, but that was supposed to be good for thinking. The rocks were volcanic, Septimus said Julian would be keen, and that Hedgewood's would be exciting, far more exciting than Durmstrang, where they couldn't even play Quidditch without returning to the mainland. Not that it was encouraged among the students, Cecilia added to herself, and, in that moment, felt very sorry for his students of the Institute, holed up there, their prime purpose academic pursuits. "There's some professors you'll like at Hedgewood's," Cecilia continued, as the thought of no Quidditch for the Durmstrangers continued to astound her son. "Professor Longbottom. Now, what he doesn't know about magical plants isn't worth knowing." "Really, Mum? He outgeeks me at any rate. So, what will it be like when I get there?" "You'll travel by boat, across the Great Lake. You'll enter the dungeon entrance, then go to the Great Hall. From the other side of the living room Uncle K spoke to his nephew. The Sorting Hat will decide which house you'll be in, then there'll be the feast." He made his way towards Septimus, putting his arm around him. Cecilia tried not to let her anger show as Septimus snuggled into him, resisting the urge to wrench him away from her son. "There's Slytherin and Ravenclaw, Gryffindor and Dash." "Hufflepuff," finished Septimus. "I know. I read about it." "Just so," nodded Callias. The houses had the same names. That was one thing that had been hotly contested and met the strongest resistance when he had brought up with the reciprocators, the ministry and the teachers at Hedgewood's as something worth changing in lieu of inclusion. It seemed that while it was fine to alter the curriculum, to change the identities of the houses was tantamount to sacrilege. It wasn't long till they were standing outside King's Cross Station, walking along platforms 8 and 9 in search of the secret entrance to platform 87/8THS. Septimus was excited, his joy increasing when he found Julian, who was pondering, as he was, the entrance. "It is all right for Julian to go through, isn't it, Uncle K?" Septimus asked, "And Mum?" Callias stooped to Septimus's level. "Yes. It's been arranged." He pointed past his nephew and to an innocuous supporting arch wall. "Just take a run at it, with your trolley. Then make sure you move out of the way, you don't want to be bumped by the next person." As Septimus, shortly followed by Julian and his parents, negotiated the secret entrance to the Hedgewards Express's platform, a shadow grew over Cecilia's mind. The conversation that she had been dreading all morning was looming in her mind. It was imminent and she was not at all certain how she would say it. "Our turn," Callias said to Cecilia, ushering her towards the entrance too. Had it not been for the fact that she was lost in her own thoughts about Septimus, Cecilia might easily have turned round and thumped him. She resisted, not least because he'd make it her problem then. The platform was bustling. Children, greeting one another and hugging, parents, wizards and non-wizards alike, greeting one another and chatting. Students compared purchases and talked about school. Some had found their seats already and stowed away their cases and trunks. Some people were fighting their way to the guard van with owls, hoping that they could be taken in. One man was having a conversation with the guard. Clearly he was a non-wizard, because he was telling the stout, black-mustachioed wizard guard that he had had no message or information to tell him that his daughter's elegant tawny owl had to be sent on ahead. Around them wizards and witches from some families seemed to have outdone themselves in dressing for the occasion. Several had come with full wizardly regalia, as if trying to show who could wear the most elegant or elaborate clothing. It was as if people had turned up in black tie and ball dresses to see off their children, and aforementioned children had also been bought, which they were already wearing before they had even had the call to change, the most expensive robes money could buy. Cecilia held her breath a few times. The crowd seemed oppressive and she felt like taking Septimus in her arms and dragging him back onto the main platform until the hubbub had died away. She tried to focus her mind on something else, but the weight of her impending task and eventual destination began to play on her mind. Then she caught sight of Petunia Black, who, from the other end of the platform, waved to Cecilia as Regulus helped their younger son Darren onto the train at that end. Petunia seemed to be trying to shout to her, but, above the noise, it was drowned out. "I suppose you've got everything you need, Septimus," said Mr. Scott, Julian's father, to Septimus. "Julian told you about your broomstick. He said it was a good one." "The best," smiled Septimus, looking up at Cecilia. She smiled back and hugged him briefly. "I didn't know whether I should buy Julian something," Mr. Scott added, looking down at him. "I mean, in case he can't fly one. There's plenty there, so I understand, and if Julian gets on with them there's always Christmas." "I'll try, Dad," replied Septimus's friend. "I know you will, son." Cecilia noticed the look of sadness pass over Septimus's face. He wanted Remus to be there. Of course he did. His own father, being too ill to be able to see him off on the most important day of his school life. "I've brought some of my fossils I got on holiday," Julian continued, rummaging around in his pockets. The darkness lifted as Septimus was instantly enthralled. "Brideport. Not as good as Lyme Regis." "Cool. We'll go the next summer," promised Mr. Scott. There had been some protests at the station that morning. Wizards with placards had picketed the entrance. Wizards for Hedgewards, some of them had read, "The right schools for the right children." Tame in comparison to the Conjurist protests over the last couple of nights. Callias looked at the crowd. The daytime facade was present amongst them, those wizards dressing in the traditional manner, having arrived in full robes to the station, in aligning patterns of old magic symbols. Their dress, which could be traced back to ancient families, had encouraged their children to dress the same, even though their garb was not school uniform. A subtle protest and easily explained. Of course, many of them had dressed in such a way because they always did. There were always traditionalists every 1st September. But the spirit conjurism was there, in the air, hammering home the unspoken hierarchy of wizards. Other evidence had not been so subtle, and it had taken strong magic to erase the circled C's, twisted old magic symbols that they were, which had been daubed both on King's Cross itself and on the walls of Platform 87/8THS. The attacks had, as usual, been sporadic, isolated, concentrated on towns which neighboured Open Heath, Wood and Moorland. Shops had been attacked and homes set on fire, not many, but enough to establish a crude pattern. Whereas attacks before had concentrated on non-wizards, this time wizards known to be sympathetic to non-wizard liberty in the magical world were targeted. A subtle shift in strategy. Not that it appeared to bother the students much. As usual, there was a clamour on the station. Few may have interpreted the meaning of the traditionalists and, of course, the non-wizard families, adults and children alike, would be none the wiser. 5 minutes to go. Cecilia looked up at the large-faced, double-sided clock with Roman numerals pointing out the time with its graceful hands. It wouldn't be long until the train left, and already the concentration of people had lessened as more and more children found a seat aboard the coaches. "Shall we get on now, too?" Julian had looked at his dad and mum, his sister Opal hugging onto her mother, both aghast and in wonder at where she was. Mr. Scott looked at his wristwatch. "Well, they said noon. I can help you on with your bag, lad. And you too, Septimus." He walked towards the nearest door, stepping easily aboard with both his son's case and Septimus's trunk in either hand. A minute or so later he was back on the platform. "There's an empty compartment just here. I've put your bags in the storage area." He looked at Cecilia, then at Callias. Yes, replied Callias, ushering Septimus towards the carriage door. "Time to go." Septimus turned back, hugging his Uncle Kay as Julian hugged his dad and mum. Opal shied away. Julian shrugged, before giving her an unexpected kiss on the cheek, which she wiped away, annoyed. Then, catching Cecilia's expression, Callias stepped away from Septimus and she walked close by him to the doorway. Leaning towards him, as if to kiss, Cecilia whispered in his ear. He was going to be away for a few months. They needed the money, and it paid well at Durmstrang, especially now Dad was ill. She had to look after both him and Remus. Septimus turned back to his mother sharply, looking up at her with wide eyes. You could see if Shope will take Broom back," Septimus replied earnestly. Cecilia said nothing. She couldn't. It took all of her courage not to break down there and then on the platform. She would have not been the only mother. Many were sobbing as they saw their offspring off on the train. Cecilia fixed him with a firm stare. "Your father and I had agreed. We'd always said we'd get you the best broom we could. Besides, I'd only get bored at home." She leaned into him, whispering close to his ear. "You can write to me anytime. I can still be in touch about Dad. Go and see him if anytime. I'll let you know if anything changes." Cecilia could feel her voice was calm, so much so that a part of her was almost convinced. "I can't flew you in Durmstrang, from Hedgewards." "I know," she says loudly. "It won't be long before I see you, my love." She kissed him, holding his face momentarily between her hands. "Stay safe, my darling." Cecilia stood back and Septimus continued the walk towards the carriage door. Then, without warning, she ran back. Callias thought for a moment that she was going to jump on the train with them. Septimus turned again and smiled at his mother. "It's okay. I'll know where you are this time, Mum." Cecilia's worried expression turned into a smile and Septimus hugged her. She held on to him momentarily before kissing him on the forehead. Then, Bending to his level, she passed him what was left of the non-wizard flu powder. "You can use it to contact me anytime, little Tim," she said hurriedly, pushing it into the inside pocket of his robe as quickly as she could. Then, resisting one last hug, for she knew she might never let him go, Cecilia stepped back as Septimus climbed aboard, appearing at the window of the nearest compartment, and waving. As the train whooshed out a cloud of steam, the wheels groaning as they began to turn under the pressure, Cecilia waved too, continuing to do so until the last carriage was out of sight. When she reluctantly turned from the track, Cecilia felt a lurch in her stomach, telling Septimus hadn't been the cause of her malcontent. No. It was still lingering, deep down, in the depths of her insides. The reality of her leaving was now growing as if cumulonimbus clouds on the horizon of a clear blue sky, portending a storm. "I don't think it'll take long to collect my belongings," Cecilia began, her first words to Cleus that day, acknowledging her fate so that the shock wouldn't hit her too soon and so she wouldn't break down in tears until she was well out of Cleus's company. "I suppose, this afternoon I'll have things ready?" She could at least check the hearth, see if either of her messages had been replied to. "It won't be any later than this evening. Then perhaps you can take me to say goodbye to Remus and—" Cecilia broke off. The look on Cleus's face was enough to tell her that she was treading the wrong path entirely. "On the contrary, I've sent your belongings on already," he replied, his tone one of familiar neutrality. "You won't be going back to the cottage. Take my arm. I'm going to flew you to Durmstrang now."